All right, I think we can get started.
Thank you, Yasmin. All right. Officially, welcome to SOAR's third annual national summit. Together we dream, together we build. Well, welcome to day two. Over the past 2 years, we've come together for our first two summits. Together we rise and together we reimagine. We had so many days and weekends of conversations, community building, just so much connection across the country. And I am so grateful that we're all back here today. Um, Please feel free to continue checking in the chat, get comfortable. For those of you who were here yesterday, some of this might sound familiar, but we're just so grateful that you're here. For some of us, if you have been in our spaces in the past, either our past summits or member meetings, we're so happy you're back again. For some of you, this may be your first time in a source space, but either way, you're so welcome, and we're so honored that you're here. This is our first session of the day, or actually our second, our welcome, keynote, and overview. We'll start with some housekeeping, give a little roadmap of our summit, share a little bit about SOAR, and then we'll get into what we're all really here for and excited about, our keynote. But first, a little bit about SOAR. We are South Asian SOAR Survivors, Organizations, and Allies Rising, which, by the way, if you haven't taken our little trivia movement quiz in Huba yet, that is the answer to one of the questions. So make sure you're paying attention today. We are a collective of over 45 organizations, more than 150 individual organizers, and growing. And we're really just united and committed to preventing and ending gender-based violence in our diaspora. We can go to the next slide. All right, I want to take a moment to formally introduce the SOAR team. By now, you've probably already noticed the bright orange screens and the orange hearts in our participant list. I'm Himadri. I'm SOAR's membership manager. Soon you'll hear from my teammates, Nahian, Amrita, and Sarajam. And in the chat and later today, you'll see and hear from Yasmin, Hannah, and Kushali. So with that, I think we can get started. I will pass it to Nahi to lead us through some grounding of why we're gathered over the next 2 days.
Thank you, Himadri. Hi, everyone. So excited to see everyone. My name is Nahi, and I'm SOAR's Communications and Advocacy Associate. And just before we get into the bulk of the summit, I want to take a moment to root us in why we're here today and why we're convening on this lovely Monday. So throughout the summit, we're convening 250 individuals across more than 20 states and 70 plus organizations, which is amazing. And something I want to highlight as we go into this is that a lot of our registrants, likely more than half, are survivors. So the work we're doing, the work we're doing today in the summit, and the work we're going to continue doing after the summit is not just for the communities we care about, but it's for us, the people in this room. And I think that's really powerful as we go into this. So we're going to dedicate today's summit to those whom we've lost to violence, those who are healing for violence, and lastly, those who dream boldly of a future free of violence, which I can assume we're all here to do. In addition to the violence in the South Asian community, we're also experiencing an incredible amount of state violence that seeks to take away our bodily autonomy through restricting reproductive rights, trans rights, and more. So, as we grieve and process domestic losses and a wave of attacks on our agency, we also are simultaneously witnessing multiple genocides around the world and just global injustice. So, we're going to honor those lives, the lives we've lost to all forms of power-based violence, including gender-based violence, state violence, and genocide. And then South Asian SOAR, as a national collective of South Asian survivors, organizations, and allies, acknowledges the ancestral and unceded territory of all Indigenous people that call Turtle Island, now known as the United States, home, and that we're currently residing on. And I know it's hard not to feel overwhelmed with all of this when we're facing constant attacks on our rights. But these tactics are rooted in fear, designed to exhaust us and push us into forming connections out of desperation. But I feel like it's safe to say we're not here out of desperation. We're here creating community to ground us and connect and learn from each other. And we're not doing this just to survive, but to create a future we can thrive in. So it seems like a big task. I want to take a moment, this is from Yasmin, to curb our existential spiral and dread and sit in the oof of it all. So, take a deep breath, acknowledge where you're sitting, feel your body. And I know I've been asking and everyone's been asking, what can we do in this moment? And what we're doing today, right now, is the best start. Being in SOAR, working with SOAR, being here is what we're doing to start this, combat all this injustice. So honor the fact that you're here, honor the fact that you're taking time to connect with everyone, and, be proud of that and be excited for that. So now I'm going to pass it on to Amrita for our summit themes and objectives.
Thank you so much, Nahi. Nahi's one of our newer teammates, so I'm just gushing at what a beautiful grounding that was, and just so appreciative of our whole team, which I think all of you are sharing love for in the chat. So we appreciate that love too. As Nahi said, being here is an act of courage, care, and community itself. And our team has thought a lot about what order the sessions should be in, how the day should start, how it should end, how we can really bring you into this space of dreaming and building. But we wanted to pose it back to you. What brings you here today? What do you hope for? I think it's a Monday, and it can be hard to kind of step out of the day-to-day and come into the summit space, but this is the moment for you to just set an intention for the day. So keep those coming in the chat. We got some beautiful ones yesterday, and it'll help you all kind of like settle into the day. But I wanted to share a little bit of what our theme is for the summit and why we chose this. Or actually, really quickly, we can go back for a second. We're just a spotlight on a quote that one of our members shared last year. What stood out the most was the commitment of everyone involved to make a real and positive impact. And actually, I think this speaks to one of our favorite parts of the summit, which is all of you, all of the engagement, interaction, and community that's built here. And now on to our theme for the summit. Together we dream, and together we build. Yesterday in our keynote from Tej, she reminded us that we should spend 10% of our time in that despair and panic responding to crisis, but 90% of our time really thinking about what this moves us to. What is the future we want to build, and what's our role in building it? And I know that on day 2 of our summit, that's for organizations who are on the front lines of addressing gender-based violence, being the frontline support system for their community. It can be hard to straddle these two. And so let this day be a permission and invitation to get into that world building, dreaming space. And I wish we could have Tej's keynote again, but I know we have so many incredible speakers, including Sujatha, our keynote today, and all of the sessions to follow that'll continue this thread and energy and invigorate you around the world that you want to build. I also wanted to give a quick reminder that last year's keynote was actually Deepa Iyer, who gifted us and gifted this movement with the social change map. And so as you interact today, as you go through the sessions, we don't all have to be the responders. We don't all have to be the dreamers and the visioners and the builders. We all play a role together, and together we make that movement stronger. So we wanted to simplify it for you, 3 key objectives of why we believe that we're here today for this national summit. To connect, because we can't do this work alone, to learn and get inspired, and to vision, to step out of the day-to-day and dream. And if we have different visions, we have different ways of thinking, we have different experiences, today's the day to connect those and be open, bring some of that warmth and nourishment that Purvi described, and really just lean into learning from one another. And before we go on to our agenda for the day, I wanted to share some gratitude for our sponsors and supporters who actually made this summit possible. First, our sponsors for this summit. We have 3 different levels: our visionary sponsors, our builders, and our dreamers, of course, with the theme of our summit. So I wanted to give a mention to the Mehta Family Fund, who's generously supported the summit, as well as the Safira Fund and Razavi Law Group. And at our dreamer level, the Sabha Foundation, who you'll hear from in a little bit, as well as the Bravery Advancement Fund, Savvy Collective, and the Patel Vig Family Fund. I can't express enough how much every logo and name on this slide is not just a corporation or company, but really an entity that believes in the work that we're doing and that all of you are doing. And so I hope you all can share your gratitude, and you can learn more about them in our Summit Handbook. And I also wanted to take a moment to thank SOAR's longtime supporters, some of whom will actually be on panels today, might be joining our sessions today, learning a little bit more about what does this collective movement look like. And they're the ones that have been our champions and supporters, believing in this vision and believing in the work that we can all do together. So I wanted to shout out these folks as well as the many individual supporters who aren't listed on this slide. And without further ado, I wanted to pass it to my incredible teammate Sarajam to take us into a recap of yesterday for those who missed it, as well as an overview of today's agenda.
Thank you so much, Amrita. I'm going to quickly recap our first day of the summit. That was yesterday. Yesterday's theme was community organizing and healing. And if you weren't able to make it, you missed out on a lot of dancing, crying, and poetry making. It was such a beautiful day. We had the privilege of having Tej Kumari Motilal for our keynote, like Amrita shared, who shared some really powerful and deeply moving words that energized and grounded us kicking off the day. Then we got to learn about the history of worker organizing and talked about the limitations of talk therapy and returning to cultural healing practices. Then we heard a reading from an incredible writer, Fariha, which also got us in our fields. And a lot of folks in the room cried. And we transitioned to community building lunch, where we got to connect with one another. We wrapped up the sessions on masculinity and men and youth autonomy and adult supremacy in the diaspora. And finally, we closed with an intimate poetry creation workshop. And so many of you shared your beautiful poetry creations. That was really special. But my favorite part of day one was all the engagement and affirmations that you all showered us and the speakers with. We can go to the next slide. So here are some of the amazing things that you have named and shared that were so heartwarming, and I'm sure we all needed to go through the day. So thank you so much. Feel free to engage in the chat like you did yesterday and connect with one another and show us how you're feeling. So for today, we can go to the next slide. Today's focus will be capacity building for organizations. Like we just had a grounding breath work with Purvi. Thank you, Purvi, for that. And we're so excited for today's keynote with Sujatha Baliga. After that, we have a packed day of sessions across 3 different blocks, touching on key themes around legal, disability, and transformative and restorative justice. Like day 1, we will have ample breaks throughout the day. And we will also have a special reading from SOAR's very own Sanctuaries anthology. And finally, we can go to the next slide. Last but not least, we will have our summit closing with Yashika Dutt, which I'm really excited about and looking forward to. Okay, now we will go over some guidelines and housekeeping. For those of you who were with us yesterday, please bear with us as this will be the same information, but we will keep it short. Firstly, while we welcome everyone in our space, we want to name that SOAR is a space by and for South Asian communities. We are dedicated to centering and uplifting those most impacted, including survivors, LGBTQI+ folks, and working class folks, to name just a few. Next, you can see some excerpts from our community guidelines on our screen, and we will be dropping the link and the full list in the chat. For time's sake, we won't review in depth, but please make sure you review these in your own time. Our first housekeeping note is on digital safety. We ask that you help us keep the summit a safe space for everyone by not sharing any summit-related links outside of SOAR's membership and summit attendees, upholding our community guidelines that we just reviewed, and updating your Zoom screen name to include your name and pronouns. Don't try to join via your phone number because we will only let folks with their phone numbers if you've already notified us. And please disable any AI note-taking bots linked to your accounts. Our next note is on accessibility. We ask that everyone in our space speak slowly and intentionally. We have live captioning through Zoom. You can have your cameras on or off. Feel free to be eating on camera, wear whatever you're comfortable in. at the same time, we would really appreciate, like yesterday, if you let us know that you're there and engaging, whether it's by keeping your cameras on, sharing in the chat, in discussion, and using Zoom reactions. On that note, we will be taking a group photo at the end of today's session, for which we will give y'all a heads up, and you can choose to keep your camera on or off. And we will also have frequent breaks scheduled throughout the day, but you're welcome to step away whenever you need to. We have some healing and grounding resources in our Summit Handbook that you can utilize as well. Now I'll pass it to Himadri to finish us off.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarajan, for taking us through that important information. Okay, starting off, in case y'all haven't seen it already from my many, many emails, our Summit Handbook is your one-stop shop for all of the links, information, and resources you need during and after the summit. Again, this is one of our answers for one of our quiz questions, so pay attention. We're putting it in the chat right now, and I can also quickly walk us through it. Yasmin, if you don't mind going to the handbook on your screen. Perfect. So you can see this is a document where if you click on the different links, if you scroll down just a little bit, it just takes you to those different sections of the handbook. So you'll see there's more about Whova, more about registration, about our summit agenda, about our speakers. But for now, Yasmin, if you can click on the live session notes and resources, that would be lovely. Perfect. So this is where you can find some resources from the summit and resources from SOAR. For example, if you were really vibing with our DJing and the music we were playing earlier, we have our playlist linked here. We also have, if you click on the link for our healing resources that Saraja mentioned, you can find those as well. Oh, sorry, I don't know why I went there. We'll fix that link. But if you keep scrolling down, you can see our attendee must-read book list, which, if y'all remember, when y'all registered, we asked you to share what's a must-read book. And just a spoiler alert, y'all have amazing taste. It's a long list of books. So definitely encourage that y'all check it out. We've been adding more and more books throughout the past day since y'all have just been sharing even more recommendations. I will definitely be revisiting this list, so encourage y'all to as well. And then this is also where we're taking live notes for all of the summit sessions and have little resource goodie bags. Sorry, Yasmin, to make you scroll around everywhere. But yeah, you can see all of the different headers for the different sections. So don't worry too much about taking notes because we'll make sure that these are all updated for you here. Okay, I think we can go now to Whova, if you don't mind. Okay, perfect. So hopefully y'all have seen Whova before because this is how you joined our session. Like folks have been sharing in the chat, Whova has been, I think, super fun for all of us to not only be able to join the sessions, but also send folks messages, like answer polls. There's been virtual meetups that people have been planning and in-person meetups. So there's just so many fun things happening here. I'll show y'all really quickly a couple of things. I think for time's sake, the main thing that I'll uplift is if you go to the left to win a prize, that's where you can see all of our fun contests that are going on. And with these contests, you get a chance to win a book by one of our speakers, including multiple of our keynotes from today, SOAR's Sanctuaries Anthology. So I see folks in the chat have gotten addicted to getting up on the leaderboard. So the more stuff you do on Whova, the more points you get. It is very addicting. If you go to the next contest, that's our photo contest, where we highly encourage y'all to add photos of whether it's your cute desk setup, your fur babies, your team attending the summit. Just drop those in here, and you also have a higher chance of winning if you post them to your social media and tag South Asian SOAR. And the way you win these or win this contest is by getting the most reactions to your photos. So everyone make sure to go check out the photos and react to them. Same thing with the next contest, our icebreakers. This is where you can introduce yourselves and answer a fun check-in question, see other folks introduce themselves. And again, the folks with the most reactions will get the most, or will win our prize. And then our last one is our trivia game, which is just some movement trivia. Like I've been sharing, we will continue to share the answers to this throughout the day. So keep an eye out. And the very last way that you can win A book by one of our speakers is by taking our summit feedback survey. I think that's everything for Huva. If you don't mind going back to the slides, Yasmin. Thank you so much. It is, you can see on the next slide that Huva's really been popping off. So encourage y'all to get on that. Okay. These are all the books that I mentioned and all the prizes that you can win. So again, we're giving away 20 copies, so you have a good chance. Make sure you're doing the contests. We can go to the next slide. Okay, perfect. Our last note is that if you need support or you have any questions during the day, please let the SOAR team know. You can DM us. Each session will have at least 2 SOAR team members. We all have orange hearts in our names, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. If for some reason, if we're busy and not responding quickly enough, you can always reach out to summit@southasiansoar.org. For example, if you have any team members who didn't get a chance to register, but you want to hit them up and say, hey, this summit is so dope, you should join, then you can have them email summit@southasiansoar and we'll give you a code to register. And if you're having a technical issue with Huva specifically, please reach out to support@huva.com. We say this every year, but this summit is by far the biggest event we've ever put on. So all we ask is for a little bit of grace throughout the day as we navigate any issues or challenges that may come up. Thank you so much for bearing with us. And I'll pass it back to Amrita to get into more of the fun stuff.
Thank you, Himadri. I didn't realize we had such a competitive crew. We might need to see if we can open up some more books to give away. And I encourage those who are maybe falling back in the leaderboard to fill out the feedback survey, do the trivia contest, post a photo. Those are all ways to win a book as well. Okay. We have actually, or we would love to take a few minutes just to talk about SOAR and all that we've done as a collective. Something that every session I think has reminded us of so far is all of the wisdom, progress, lineages, and legacy that our movement is built on many years, even before the last 4 decades. But as SOAR, we've been helping to compile what has been our history of the South Asian gender justice movement so far. 2 anniversaries I want to shout out. This year marks 40 years of Manavi, which was the first South Asian gender-based violence nonprofit organization, which was really kind of the official start of many of the organizations that we now see today. And this year is also the 30th anniversary of Raksha, from a gender-based violence organization in Georgia. You can actually find the full movement history with all of our member organizations' founding years on our website. And just a disclaimer, history is, I mean, our movement has been so underdocumented for so long that we're doing our best to compile what we can. And we encourage you to treat this as a living document that you contribute to as well. So if there's archival material, if there's a historical moment that you think is missing and you think belongs, just let our team know. And now I wanted to share a little bit about how SOAR was actually founded, because I know we've had so many new members join us in the past few months. We thought it'd be good to have a little history lesson. And again, as Himadri said, some of these questions or answers might pop up in the trivia contest. So SOAR was actually founded at the height of the COVID pandemic, when there was the ongoing COVID pandemic, as well as an increase in gender-based violence, as well as the Black Lives Matter movement and systemic injustices that were being highlighted across so many of these crises. And this period kind of spurred a national dialogue asking, how can we actually work together collectively to strengthen our work and voices so that we're not carrying this movement alone? I wanted to shout out our co-founders, a few incredible leaders from across the movement: Rachna Khare, who is the former executive director at Daya in Houston; Aparna Bhattacharya, who is the executive director and has been for many decades of Raksha in Georgia; Kavita Mehra, who's the executive director of Sakhi in New York; and Navneet Bala, who is the executive director of Manavi, as well as Veda, who's formerly the communications manager at Sakhi, and myself. And when I look at this team, I see a lot of historical legacy and movement building coming in to help create the container for this South Asian survivor justice movement. And so we started with this group of 6, and then it became 15, and then slowly we were at 30 members. And we kept asking as we went, what is the vision like for this collective movement? From a movement that has operated in a scarcity mindset for so long, can we move to abundance? And out of that questioning, SOAR was born with generous seed funding from the Ramesh and Kalpana Bhatia Family Foundation. And then over the past 3 years, we've built our team from 1 to now 5 plus incredible team members you see on the call today. Just to ground ourselves in the purpose of SOAR, the first thing we did when we founded SOAR was we actually did listening sessions to hear from all of you. And that's been a grounding kind of orientation and purpose for SOAR all along. How can we best serve our community and our members? And so SOAR was founded in 2021 to unite a national movement. And our vision is really rooted in collective power. How can we come together to transform culture and systems? How can we each play our role and work together? And so this looks kind of like 4 things right now. Capacity building for grassroots organizations. This has really been our bread and butter and the first thing we ever started with. We currently have 45 plus member organizations. Power building and organizing with survivors and allies. It's always been such an important priority for SOAR to center survivors in this movement, but also kind of stake in the ground that this movement is one of collective responsibility. And so it's not only on organizations, nor is it only on survivors, but really this broader community that we refer to as allies. And then in terms of that transformation and systems, we do 2 main things: research and advocacy. That's a lot of our research reports, fact sheets, briefings, advocacy letters like our Their Light Remains series. And then 4th is something that I think actually goes across all of our pillars, which is storytelling and education for healing and culture change. Again, our survivor stories, our consent scene, and I'll be going into a couple of those milestones in just a second. But I wanted to also kind of tell you all how many people are in our collective today. SOAR is actually an intergenerational, and I added that word in here, which I think if anyone joined the summit yesterday or even was there for the first session this morning, I feel like our intergenerationality, if that's a word, is such a highlight, gift, and just special kind of sauce of SOAR. I think for many people, it's really difficult to build that space of dialogue, of learning, connection. I'm even thinking of Surajam's session yesterday on adultism and youth autonomy, and straddling that balance of listening to young folks. Our team is also really young, but honoring everything that's happened before and how we can kind of always be balancing those 2 things is something I think we really do beautifully as a collective. And that collective has now ballooned. We are over 500 survivors, advocates, and allies, 45 plus organizations in our membership. We have 40 years of the movement to look back on, and we are across half of the states and hopefully more. I wanted to just do a quick rapid fire of some of our key kind of milestones, because I think we really feel that in just over 3 years, we've made a resounding impact together. First up, some of our research and advocacy, which I already shared about. I think I just wanted to highlight our Their Light Remains series, which is a series we hold at the end of every year, where we honor the lives lost to violence. To our team, it feels like the one thing where everyone comes together, everyone is impacted by it, and we bring together beautifully research, advocacy, statistics, art, healing, grief, community. It feels like everything really comes together. And it's a difficult way to end the year, but I think that grief is also something we always channel into action at this summit, going into the next year, as a reminder that we will always let those lights remain. Next is our survivor storytelling work, which builds on what we do with Their Light Remains. And I'll just shout out that in the fall of last year, we launched our 2nd survivor storytelling program and published our first anthology of survivor stories called Sanctuaries. And today you'll be hearing a reading from Dimple, one of our storytellers, from her beautiful story in the anthology. And just a quick mention that everyone's been talking about sanctuary a lot. And we really hope, like, even in book form and through these stories, folks can find sanctuaries. Next up, our reproductive justice work. I'll also just give one quick shout out to what we released in the fall, our consent zine, or a zine on consent and boundaries. It was our first foray into community education for and focused on youth and young adults, really making preventative education accessible. And I want to shout out that this was actually led by our individual members and organizers in what we think is a beautiful kind of match of needs surface from our organizations and where our organizers were able to tap into and create a resource where it feels like there was a gap. And finally, I wanted to share our national summits. We started in 2023 as a response to Their Light Remains because we just felt like we had to come together. As much as we do come together monthly and we have our listserv, the summit feels like the time where we really do get to be and feel all of that community, that good energy, that love. And so we started creating these summits, and every year we've built on it, and this is our biggest one yet, as Himadri said. So we're super excited to convene this space. And with that, I'll pass it to Himadri to share a little bit about all of our membership offerings.
Thank you so much, Amrita. So just to share about what do we really do on the day-to-day? What do we offer to our organizational and individual membership networks? Everything is really focused on capacity building and community building. We have our member listservs that keep folks connected across the country, sharing resources, client referrals, questions, and so much more. We have our member events, of course, like the one we're all at today, and resources like the many Amrita mentioned and so many more, like our case management mentorship program, our newsletters. And I think if we go to the next slide, you can see another resource that SOAR created last year and actually just publicly launched at this summit, our Transformative Justice Workbook, IMGAN. We actually debuted it for the first time to our members at last year's summit. We shared the first chapter. Since then, we've done trainings on this workbook. It really has so many incredible tips and tools for South Asian advocates and organizers to implement TJ into our practices. And of course, it's one of the key themes of our summit and our keynote today. So it just really feels so perfect and full circle. And speaking of our commitment to transformative justice, if you go to the next slide, you can see yet another resource that we debuted last year and just publicly launched as well on our website, our movement commitments. These were created by the SOAR team as the foundation for our vision and framework of survivor justice. These name our commitments to climate justice, gender justice, racial justice, and so much more. And while we recognize that these may not represent the exact views of every individual or organization in our network, we really just hope it'll serve as a North Star for our movement and that it can start important dialogues like in our sessions today. On the screen, we have excerpts from a few of our commitments that we felt like were especially relevant for today's sessions, such as our upcoming keynote on TJ and RJ, our closing keynote on caste and caste abolition, and our multiple disability justice sessions that we have throughout the day. We're also putting the full commitments in the chat. For time's sake, last year we had everyone read them out loud, which was lovely. For time's sake, we're just putting them in the chat, but I really encourage you to take a moment to read them, sit with them, and I hope that they really serve as a helpful resource for y'all. Okay, I'm gonna pass it back to Amrita to share just a little bit more.
Thank you, Himadri. Just building on everything that Himadri shared about our membership resources, everyone has kind of touched on the moment that we're in. And again, at SOAR, we're always straddling how do we both respond to the immediate needs and build for the future. And so this is kind of what we're doing to meet the moment, both understanding that folks might be in a state of anxiety, despair, and just uncertainty. And we see ourselves as a support system for all of you. And so a couple things that we're doing are we've first been launching a survey and needs assessment of all of our organization's top needs right now and trying to respond to those immediately. So we've launched these leadership forums for executive directors to come together and learn about fundraising, financial scenario planning, crisis communications, kind of any of the new skills or things that they need to be implementing right away. And it's a really strong form of peer support. If you're an executive director in this room right now and you're not a part of those, there's resources and links for how to get involved. It should be in your emails, but it's also in the Summit Handbook. Secondly, coming out of that needs assessment, there was a highly requested kind of need to consolidate the barrage of information that we are receiving into something that's easy to follow and relevant to our organizations. And so Nahi on our team has been leading an effort behind the Rapid Response Information Hub. Thirdly, for all of our advocates and kind of any staff member at a member organization, we're working on expanding our case management mentorship. This is going to look like increased hours, more resources, more office hours so that we can help you through these high-risk cases. We can, in general, honestly, I recommend reaching out whenever you need support. It doesn't have to be case management. And we got you. We will try to figure out a way to get you the support you need. And our incredible membership team, Himadri and Sarajam, are just so incredible at this. And then finally, this is in italics because things are tentative, but at SOAR, again, it's a priority to see how we can not just support you with additional learning and resources, but materially resource you. And so we're working on building a fund, likely a small fund, where we can provide micro grants to our member organizations. We're also working on building cross-movement partnerships so that we can bring more legal updates, information, pro bono services to all of our member organizations or individual members as well, should and as they need it. So one of those organizations is SAJCO, the South Asian American Justice Collaborative. If any of you see Kalpana in the attendees, Kalpana is the executive director of SAJCO and a close partner of SOAR, as well as Tahire, API GBV, just to name a few of our other partners. And on that note, we actually wanted to, I'll skip this because I feel like we got to hear a lot from our members. I wanted to pass it to one of our sponsors to share a word of the resources that our member organizations can avail of. And actually, really quickly, I realize that our sponsor is not on the call right now, so we're going to find another moment for this. But I will, I guess, quickly speak to it in case anyone is only here for this session. The Sabha Foundation is actually a provider of legal grants or small grants to support organizations with legal support and services and resources. I think in a few weeks, they'll be releasing their grant application, and they wanted to share that with all of our members. They'll also be hosting more public webinars where you all can hear updates about what's happening directly from lawyers who probably can translate it better than we can. So we'll be sharing the links to Sabha as well as when this application goes live. And like I said, I'm sorry that we weren't able to have our sponsor join us right now, but we'll do our best to bring them back at a later point in the summit.
I think they are just joining the room if we want to give them a minute.
Okay, do we have a second?
Yeah, I think we have a minute. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, perfect. Tejas, if you're on, I'd love to hand it to you to share a few words about what the Sabha Foundation can offer to our members.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the invite and sorry to just be joining. We're really excited to have an opportunity to share a little bit of information about the Sabha North America Foundation. We are a nonprofit foundation affiliated with the South Asian Bar Association of North America. We've been in existence for essentially about close to 2 decades at this point. And our mission is supporting access to justice for South Asians throughout the community. Traditionally, the way we've done that is by handing out grants to nonprofits. I believe some of the organizations that are part of this summit have previously applied to and received funding from our foundation. We realize that this is a moment that really sort of requires everyone to go a little bit bigger. And for us, that translates into a couple of different things. The first is that the size of our grants is increasing this year. We're increasing those grants from what used to be 6,500 to 15,000. And we're going to have a total of 5 grants that we're offering, each at 15,000, covering essentially efforts to provide immigration assistance, to combat hate crimes and discrimination, to combat gender violence, and also workforce development. So you will, on or around March 1st, you should find the new grant application on our website. I believe that the link to our website was just shared in the chat here. So feel free to bookmark that. You can look at it, on or after March 1st, and also make sure that we share that grant application once it goes live with Amrita and the team at SOAR. The second thing that I want to mention is that we're starting a new law student summer fellowship program. And so the idea behind this is to allow law students who are going to work in the public interest for a summer to apply for a stipend to cover their work. We're specifically targeting partnership with local SABA chapters, and we're particularly interested in partnering with SABA chapters in smaller communities where the existing SABA chapter doesn't necessarily have a public interest fellowship program, and where perhaps the community would stand to significantly benefit from more individuals working to benefit, public interest efforts for South Asians in those areas. So if you are an organization that's interested in working with a law student over the summer and have just not been able to figure out how to get funding for it, I'd encourage you to consider reaching out to your local SABA chapter. You can also reach out to us and we can let you know who the right contact folks would be at your local SABA chapter if you want to consider partnering with them. This is part of our effort to sort of expand pathways to work in the public interest. It's the first time we're ever doing it, so we're going to just ask you to bear with us a little bit as we sort of, work out the kinks in a program like this. And then the last thing that I want to mention is programming. So we are committed to offering programming to nonprofits that helps nonprofits connect themselves with each other and also expands their access to knowledge at a time when everything seems to be shifting so quickly. Our next program is going to be in March. We should have an announcement going out soon, and I can also share that with Amrita and the team at SOAR. Our pro bono corporate counsel, Ravi Sundara, who's a nonprofit who has deep expertise in nonprofit law, is going to be presenting. It's something that he does on an annual basis for us, particularly with the issues that are of concern to organizations right now. We think that this is going to be a very timely program. If you are interested in participating, we'd encourage you to register once that registration link goes live, and also share any questions that you might have for him. He's interested in seeing your questions in advance so he can appropriately prepare. So with that, I want to thank SOAR for putting this program on, for giving us an opportunity to be a sponsor, and for this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about our foundation.
Thank you so much, Tejas. As Tejas said, we'll share all of the links, both in the chat and then as we hear of the grants and the webinar, so you all can avail of these resources. And thank you again for your sponsorship of our summit. And now on to the moment that you've all been waiting for. It is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker for day 2 of our summit, Sujatha Baliga. We're building on the themes that we've already covered so far. We're honored to ground ourselves in wisdom from a leader who has spent decades transforming justice, healing, and accountability. Sujatha's work in restorative justice has shaped national conversations on harm, healing, and forgiveness. As a survivor advocate and MacArthur Fellow, she challenges us to imagine new ways of responding to violence, ways rooted in love, not punishment. Her keynote will guide us in understanding how love can be a force for change, even in moments of deep pain. And just in a few weeks of knowing you and talking to you, that love is so evident in all of your interactions. So without further ado, join me in welcoming Sujatha.
Thank you so much. And I'm just so grateful for this way overdue connection with your wonderful organization and really just a dream come true that you all exist. And really, what an important thing, this network that we need to be creating across all of our work, but particularly in this arena. Just super grateful for everything you do and grateful for the invitation to be here with you all today. What a wonderful turnout. This really is sort of my dream come true. I'm going to be starting with a little bit of discussion about my personal journey to the work that I do in restorative justice, and specifically in its relationship to intimate partner and sexual violence. And I won't be sharing details of what happened to me and very many details about the work that I do or the specifics of the cases I've engaged in. That being said, of course, given the underlying subject matter of this entire event, right, and all the work that we do, just a reminder to take good care of yourselves. What a wonderful grounding we had this morning, and to rely back on those practices or anything else that works for you, including keeping your screen off, taking care of yourself. I take no offense at any efforts to be in this to the degree to which it works for you, your heart, your body, your spirit, your being. Really just an invitation to do that. So a little bit about me and the work and what brought me to it. So during high school, a little bit, and then more so in college, I got involved in work to end intimate partner and sexual violence, working on hotlines, working with my universities. The law school at my university had a battered women's justice project, as we called it back in the 80s and 90s. And really all of this was working to doing a lot of speaking at Take Back the Night rallies. And this kind of work back then was really, it was nascent, it was new, it was risky to be trying to be a survivor leader at that time. That really wasn't a thing. If anything, a lot of the movement spaces back then, I was so heartened to hear how many folks are here who are survivors. There was a time in which survivordom was pathologized, and there was a way in which our being out survivors was not seen as data, that we had data from our lives, but rather that it was, that we were supposed to be clients, not participants. And that was a really difficult and challenging piece of the work, or that there was only one way to be a survivor, and that the way to be a survivor was to be in lockstep with what we were hearing from the movement at that time, more broadly speaking. And it was very much about getting folks to understand that intimate partner violence is violence, and that the way we deal with violence in the United States and in the world more broadly is that we criminalize it, right? And so I had questions about it from the beginning, but I didn't have a space or way to understand. Why was it that I myself had never wanted the police called on my father? Why was it that I never sought help that was available? What were my legitimate concerns about potential immigration consequences, or a desire to not be separated from my family, or for every situation not being answerable with a single pre-existing answer? And so I think all of these things made me think, well, what would culturally responsive approaches be? And so I moved out here to California, which is where I am now. And at that time, I was briefly here just for a year, and I worked with very nascent Narika, volunteered with them, and something else back in the day that was called ICOP, the Indian Community Outreach Program, because we didn't even want to, I don't think that any version of it still exists, but we didn't even want to name intimate partner sexual violence, calling it, working with battered women back then, because we thought that people couldn't even access it if we called it a thing. And so we were trying to do a thing that we didn't call a thing. And I also worked with this safe place shelter. That was sort of one of my jobs at the time. And at the same time, I was working with the ACLU, not the ACLU, sorry, the name is leaving me, but I was doing work in organizing and wondering, like, what would organizing look like? And all of these things were sort of coming together in my life. I continued after college to work with various domestic violence shelters in New York. And back then there were city operated domestic violence shelters in New York. I moved to New York, and then I moved to India for a year. And I was trying to work with my then partner on a project that he was beginning, working with children of folks with HIV who are living in Kamartipura, who are enslaved in the sex trade there, and young girls who are being sold from Nepal into the industry, and had a complete breakdown during that year. Fell apart, hadn't really worked as deeply in my own healing journey. My entire approach really was to try to heal what had happened to me by helping others. I thought, okay, my father passed away when I was 16. He had been my abuser, my primary abuser, and that was over now. And now I'm going to just fix the world by, making sure that nothing that happened to me ever happens to anyone again. Nothing that happened in our family happens to anyone else again. And I hadn't done the work, and there wasn't a lot of understanding about what it means to be a wounded healer, or a healer that is healing both ourselves and others at that time. It was really just sort of a do your best to repress and keep it moving. And during that year, I did a great deal of self-exploration, found my spiritual path, became Buddhist, went on a very, very powerful journey of letting go of the anger that was killing me and really harming my body and my ability to do the work that I needed to do in the world. And it all began because I actually quit. I left and I went backpacking by myself, which everyone thought was really unwise, and landed in Dharamshala and got to know some folks in the Tibetan community in exile. This was in the early 1990s, and I was 24 years old. And through a unbelievably strange course of events, had an opportunity to sit for an hour alone with His Holiness the Dalai Lama with translators. And His Holiness really helped me understand the value of my rage and its usefulness in engaging with things that should never happen in this world to myself or others. And when does that rage have diminishing returns? When is that rage actually impeding my capacity to do good work in the world, because it's actually eating me up as well? And so how do I have the appropriate amount of the beneficial amount, the necessary amount of anger to work against injustice, and at the same time not have that end up being a flame that burns to its own destruction, scorching me, others, and my work, my coworkers, etc. So this was the gift of that meeting, and how it inspired me. Actually, I was heading off to law school to become a prosecutor, which people find humorous to this day, and so do I when I think about, wow, that is just not at all where I ended up. And indeed, if anything, I ended up through this course of events and my own internal shift, learning about what was then called the National Clearinghouse for the Defense of Battered Women, which happened to be in Philadelphia, which is where I was studying. Learned about defending women who were accused of crimes because they were in abusive relationships, whether it was being forced to carry their abuser's drugs, et cetera, or even defending themselves against an abusive partner and then ending up getting criminalized for that. And so all of these things landed me in about 10 years of defense work, but ultimately, and including doing capital defense work, but ultimately feeling like all those years in victim advocacy never really met the needs of survivors. Often felt like I was shoving survivors into a box that didn't work for them, or had inadequate anything to offer folks based on how they would self-identify their own needs. And then in the criminal legal system, just feeling like it was just staked against my clients, regardless of how they ended up doing, regardless of level of trauma that led them to cause the harms that they did. And so I don't mean to be disparaging in any way of the work that I did in the past. It is all critical and necessary. I'm so grateful for everyone who still works in all those things. But for me personally, it was time to move towards something that could hold all the truths simultaneously. I went back to India, started to study the Tibetan system of justice prior to Chinese occupation, started looking at like, what was panchayat? Like, what was jirga? Like, what were some of these things that we did and thought, none of this works. The Tibetan system of justice was interesting to me. Started talking to friends back in the States. Again, this was like in the mid 90s, and people were saying, you really need to learn about restorative justice. This really resonates with the things that you were doing, so that you're talking about, that you're thinking about. And so came back to the States and started studying primarily with Mennonite folks in the beginning, who sort of coined the term restorative justice, and going on their own faith journey and thinking about what does a covenant justice look like within their own communities. saw some really groundbreaking work in the 1990s around addressing intimate partner and sexual violence in church spaces, actually, which I was like, something doesn't feel right here. And yet there was some beauty and wisdom in what I was seeing, some capacity there. And so from there, I started studying with Indigenous folks the world over, and all of that brought me to restorative justice and trying to think about what would it look like for us to be able to do this kind of work. And so, I want to share really briefly, a very brief PowerPoint on what is restorative justice, because lots of folks know about restorative justice. The words get thrown around a lot. Some folks here may have been practicing it for years. And I like to think of, I feel really blessed by having been deeply impacted by what one of my, Indigenous teachers calls the three cousins, which is peacemaking, Indigenous justice and peacemaking, transformative justice and restorative justice. I myself have found my home in restorative justice in part because I came into it through the criminal legal system. And those of us who are abolitionists, and I would put myself in that category, are trying to find ways to engage with harm in our families and communities entirely outside the criminal legal system. I still am mostly drawn to the modalities of engaging that harm and conflict that I've learned in restorative justice spaces. And, that would be peacemaking and circle and family group conferencing, New Zealand style, Aotearoa style, Maori processes. So these are the methodologies that I feel most drawn to, and that's sort of the communities that I tend to roll in. But I hope that I sufficiently bring my abolitionist frame into that body of work. And so, but let's do a little bit of, I'm going to do a screen share here of a brief PowerPoint. And is that shown up for folks now? Let me see. Where'd it go? Here it is. Nope. Sorry. One more time. Are people seeing the PowerPoint now? Okay, great. Sorry about that. So what's restorative justice? I like to think about it the way Howard Zehr speaks of it, who is known as the grandfather of restorative justice. And I think it's important to name that the terminology came from this Mennonite man who did an amazing amount of work on thinking. He was in the 1960s, he transferred to Morehouse College, really driven. He's a white man who was the first white man to graduate from Morehouse, and his work really began grounded in notions of responsibility to ending, what he was seeing as the growth of racialized mass criminalization. And he calls us to a paradigm shift in the way in which we think about harm doing and wrong. He says today, when we think about, questions of wrongdoing, if we ask a prosecutor, we think about the current criminal legal system. These are the kinds of questions that come up for us. What law was broken, who broke it, and how should they be punished? And the paradigm shift he calls us to is really asking a different set of questions, which are who's been harmed and what are their needs and whose obligation is it to meet those needs? And so this really blew my mind when I read it, because when I see these side by side, right, the present legal system, what law was broken, who broke it, and what punishment is deserved, versus who was harmed and what do they need, and then whose obligation is it to meet those needs. Those second set of questions really spoke to me when I was a child. If someone had asked me who was harmed and what did they need, I wouldn't have said, lock up my father. I wouldn't have said all the things that were potentially on offer. I would have said I would have needed the harm to end. I would have needed safety. I would have needed protection. I would have needed him to stop. I would have actually, when I was a kid, I used to pray that he would stop doing what he was doing to all of us, including him, his own self. I wish that he would help himself become that he would have help to become his best self. And so for me, the second set of questions really spoke to a deeper need that I had. And so when we think about restorative justice, it really is about this shift towards this big picture of, instead of crime being a violation of the state, it's a violation of people and interpersonal relationships. And those violations create obligations, And the central obligation is as much as possible to do right by the folks you've harmed. So if it were just those first two questions, right, on that last slide, which is, who is harmed and what do they need? I mean, that's what we should just do with everybody. Anytime somebody is hurting, anytime someone is suffering in the world, like, who is harmed and what do they need is kind of how we should engage with each other. But when we add that question of obligations, that's what makes it a justice paradigm. Who's obligated to meet those needs? And it's not just the person who's caused the harm, it's also the communities that have co-signed and wrapped around and allowed or disengaged or whatever. There's a lot of folks who are obligated. And so the work really, when it's happening at its best, includes all of them. As a restorative justice facilitator, it's really important to understand that restorative justice and mediation are really different things. So with mediation, particularly the way in which we learn it in law school, it's like driving everyone to like an outcome in the middle, or how are we going to like come up with an outcome that's going to attend to various, like one of my law professors once said, a good mediation outcome is when everybody's a little bit dissatisfied. So that sounds like exactly the opposite of anything we should be doing in domestic violence and sexual harm, or in general. It just doesn't feel like that's justice, right? And so for me, this is not about being a neutral person who's trying to drive an outcome or anything of that nature. It's more about having our hearts be equally partial to everyone. A notion of all boats rise with the tide. Is there a way in which we can lift up everyone impacted, people who've been harmed, responsible people, and the community? And so that's, a very, very brief introduction. Let me see if I can unshare my screen 1 second here. Sorry, folks. There we go. Stop share. Okay, so with that, I want to just have folks take a couple moments to think, just pause for just one moment and check in with yourself. Take a deep breath. That's a lot of information. And I apologize. I talk so fast. I try to slow down. But let's just take a moment now to slow down and take a breath and ground ourselves. And whatever way works for you. And I'm going to ask folks to think about a time in which you experienced harm. You don't have to think about the worst thing that happened. You could. You're not going to share it or any of the details. But I'm going to ask you to think about, what did you need at the time at which you experienced that harm? I would ask folks if you'd want to drop into the chat, again, without identifying details about the harm you experienced, the need you had then, right? What need did you have at that time? So for me, to have been believed, I could say. The person to acknowledge it. Yeah, to be believed, courage, right? Autonomy, and seeing all these things. To be seen and heard. Validation. Not to be gaslit. Safe housing, parental intervention, culturally competent life skills and education. Beautiful. Safe housing, validation, to be safe. For him to stop hurting me. These are beautiful. And as these fill in and you see them, my own physical, safety, to be believed, to be witnessed, not fixed. Oh, that's gorgeous. Yes. So now I want you to think, is there still something you still need around this? Is there still something you might need around this harm? Yeah, to be included, not ostracized. Tell it. For people to talk openly without shame is mine. Anything else that people want to add, to feel safe in my body, right? There's still needs, right, that occur to this day with a thing. Maybe you're thinking about something recent, maybe you're thinking about something in the past. And now, as these to have messy yet critical conversations, not demonize or other, so beautiful. These are great, all of them, all the ones I'm singing, all the ones I'm not able to, name them. They're all beautiful and important needs. Now I'd ask us to actually take another deep breath and consider a time in which you caused harm. This one can be a little ouchy, but all of us, because we are human beings, have harmed. It doesn't mean we've done absolutely horrific things, whatever, but we've harmed others at some time in our lives. And when you think about that, you can say either then, at the time you caused the harm, or even now, what are some needs that you have in relationship to that harm? What did you need at the time? Instead of, thinking about what should have been done to you, think about what did you need at the time in which you caused that harm, and what is the need that you have now? Yeah, ouchie, indeed. Understanding to be understood, someone to process with, to be seen as multitudinous, absolutely. We're more than the worst things we did, right? An emotional outlet and a cry, someone to figure out what to do, some support for what to do, healthy models, educating support, understanding, right? Tools about having healthy relationships, all of these things. So, um, you know, when I've done this exercise over and over and over again, and I've done it with elected district attorneys, I have done it with groups of survivors, you know, hundreds of survivors I've done this with. I've done it inside prisons. I've done it with formerly incarcerated folks, with people inside prisons who've caused sexual and intimate partner harm. And never once have I ever heard, so we do it with like these Post-it notes. We write on different colored Post-it notes. What did we need then? What do we need now? When we cause the harm, when we experience the harm. So you never really know what people did. And then we take these Post-it notes and we put them up on a wall, and we clump them by issue. And so you can see people say to forgive, to be forgiven, to apologize, to hear an apology, and we clump them to see how they all line up together, actually, the things that were needed in relationship to the harm caused, and the things that were needed in relationship to having experienced that harm, whether you did it or you received the harm, or whether or not it was something in the middle. Sometimes some things are like that. And so, so with that, I would just say, to hold in our hearts like that. Well, I won't finish that story really briefly. No matter where I've done it, nobody's ever written the word prison. Maybe that happened today, and if it happens, it's okay. But I've been doing this for 11 years, and I've never really seen, um, um, you know, it's really, really powerful to see that the needs don't align with the current systems that we have in place. When you look through this needs and you think about going to court, you think about, there's so much there that is important to understand, that we don't center our current processes on the needs of those who've experienced harm. In my experience of going to a court and going to court, it's very rare that that happens. And so, um, I was drawn to trying to find a system that would allow me to better meet the needs of folks who are experiencing harm, and to honor the child that I was and the things that I needed. And so, no, just a second, I'm gonna catch up with my notes here. One thing I want to say is that restorative justice processes, and there's so many of them, and they can operate in relationship to the pre-existing criminal legal system. You hear about circles happening inside of prisons, people having dialogues with the person who harmed them, or the person who even took their family member's life, like people having direct dialogue inside a prison, all the way to things happening completely outside the criminal legal system, which is where I primarily tend to operate. And that is sort of that. I've done a little bit of work with district attorneys across the nation, helping. There are like 14 sites now, primarily in youth cases, where cases are diverted pre-charge to a restorative justice process. And what we've seen with that work is that, and those are for not just intimate partner and teen dating violence and other kinds of, and some sexual harm cases. It's mostly like robberies, carjack, some teen dating violence, but burglaries, things of that nature. And we've seen a 44% reduction in recidivism for kids who get an opportunity to sit face to face with the folks that they've harmed. They're supported by family and community on both sides, come up with a plan to repair that harm, And when that plan to repair the harm is completed, no charges are ever filed. And so we've shown 44% reduction in recidivism and a 91% victim satisfaction rate. We can't do a comparative analysis because the criminal legal system doesn't keep track of victim satisfaction data. It assumes that a conviction is satisfaction, which is a really different thing than just asking folks, like, were you satisfied with the process? Were your needs met? It's a really different set of questions. And so what I would say is the restorative justice works actually best when we have, to my mind, less state intervention. As soon as the criminal legal system has kind of got its hands on it, then there are questions of like, what's going to happen to me instead of how are we going to work together to heal this? And so the more we can keep it in the arena of how can we sit together and heal this, the better our outcomes will be. And I would say that it's works better actually with more serious cases. So I worry a little bit that people want to use sort of RJ processes for everything these days. And sometimes I would like for us to start to make a distinction in our mind between when we're experiencing discomfort, when we're having disagreement, when there is conflict, when there's actual harm, and then when there's violence. And, there's it's not very tidy. There are overlaps between these areas, but if we can have a sort of a more of an understanding that restorative justice processes work really, really well in the context of things where there's actual harm, we can mitigate how conflict can transform into harm, or things that are uncomfortable can then be co-signed for so long that they start to have elements of power and control and then move into harm, right? But generally speaking, restorative justice processes and these dialogues in which we bring people face to face in order to come up with a plan to repair the harm, or come up with a plan to reduce the amount of violence in a relationship, or make things right, where things are driven by the self-identified needs of the person experiencing harm, and we have eyes on the situation in order to help make sure that this never happens again, or make sure people have the tools that they need, make sure people know that they are being lovingly observed within the context of community to keep folks safe. This is something that sort of it works better when we're using it in the context of more serious harm and not for like more lower level stuff. It can kind of feel like overkill. It's a little bit too much, and the processes can kind of break down and people think, oh, restorative justice doesn't work. Well, was it the right tool, or should people just had a conversation? It's a really important question that we have, I think. Sometimes we just need to talk with folks that we're in conflict with. So I'm going to return to the slides for just a moment to just cover a couple more things. Uh-oh, what happened? My screen sharing is paused. I'm going to try it again. I don't need the slides, actually. Let me just say what I was going to say, which is that, so there are a few things about like, what does this look like, right? So I've said a lot of theoretical things, and what does it actually look like in practice? And so I myself was really initially inspired by Hollow Water, which is a community in Manitoba. And I would really encourage folks to take a look at it's a movie that's available by the Canadian Film Review Board called Hollow Water. And it is looking at an Ojibwa community who a group of women came together to talk about the severity of alcoholism that was going on in their community, and they themselves were suffering from it. And in the process of sitting in circle, a group of women sitting in circle came to the realization that almost all of them had been sexually abused when they were forcibly taken and put in boarding schools, and then returned to the community, and that there was rampant child sexual abuse happening within the small community in Hollow Water, Canada, in Manitoba. And when they realized the sort of the roots of this rampant sexual abuse that was occurring, they had 80% of kids saying they'd been sexually abused in the community. 40% of adults were starting to admit that they themselves had sexually abused kids in the community. It was so the state wanted to get involved, and the community, the Hollow Water community, pushed back. Basically was like, look, you took our kids away last time, and this is how this happened. So let's not do that again. And so they work closely with the Cree community, their neighboring Cree community, and they say to relearn their medicine. What was their medicine? The circle processes and engaging in dialogue. And through this, they built a program where the child sexual abuse in their community was unearthed, spoken about openly, and it's a really, really powerful movie where you get to actually watch kids be in direct dialogue with their parents in these community circles. And they showed over the course of this, like I told you, the horrific stats on the amount of CSA happening in that community. In the end, they only had like 2 reported cases of CSA, just bringing it out in the open, just learning to talk about it, not just because you'll see in the film, there are like huge amounts of preparatory work for the folks who are causing harm, huge amounts of support for them to not do it again. So this is really important sort of landmark, beautiful process that was engaged in by this community. And it really inspired me to say, what would it look like if we just sat down and had a conversation? And so maybe a decade or so ago, I put a shout out in the Bay Area for child sexual abuse survivors of South Asian descent to just come sit in circle on what would it look like for us to just start talking amongst ourselves. And we did that for some time, and it really, I think out of that and realizing that like we can talk about this, we can do this, was like a lot of confidence in me grew. So then when Susan Kim, who's the Family Justice Center in Richmond, California, reached out to me and said, we're thinking about starting a restorative justice thing here. Would you want to get involved? I've got Mimi Kim on board too. My heart said yes. And out of that initial conversations, and I was involved for years, and I'm still involved, something called the Chat Project, Collective Healing and Transformation. And you can look them up. They're in Richmond, California. Amazing organization working at the nexus of restorative justice and intimate partner and sexual violence. And sometimes I still co-facilitate cases with them. And it's been really powerful to see that we can actually do this, that we can actually sit down and work with folks who've caused harm, works with folks who've experienced harm when they are ready, if they are interested, bringing them together, finding other ways to meet needs when then having a dialogue isn't what's of interest. And really operating without criminalization and finding ways to help people be and feel safer. And Mimi Kim's written a study about it that we can make sure that you guys get access to. And then I've also gone back to India and started, after the Nirbhaya case, people reached out to me. Somebody happened to be visiting who was working in the nexus of child rights and child sexual abuse. And so a lot of organizations working with children who suffer and experience harm in India don't really draw this bright line between folks who cause harm and experience harm. And sometimes orgs work with both, which I find wonderful. There are many countries that actually don't, they call them children in conflict with the law sometimes, and then things get broadened and there's an understanding that there may be also survivor history there. And so when that happened, there was this huge pushback by actually organizations working to end gender-based violence against, after the Nirbhaya case, looking to reduce the amount of, punitiveness in response to that case, that there was a big push to reinstitutionalize the death penalty for young people who've caused harm after the Nirbhaya case. And it was actually orgs working to end gender-based violence that were against it. And so through those conversations with them, they invited me to come, and we started sitting in circle and doing trainings there with several organizations in India. And for me, that's been wildly healing. And, I just want to, say that, in closing, I know that we're kind of coming up on time here, I think. How much time do I have, folks? I want to just, I have a little bit of time left. Okay, so I want to name 2 things. So there's been some historical resistance to the nexus of intimate partner violence and domestic violence, sexual violence being addressed through restorative justice. I think there are some legitimate fears that we want to keep in mind, right? That a lot of the work that happened in the 1980s and 90s was to make sure that we weren't privatizing sexual violence, domestic violence, that we didn't want to push it into the shadows. And the fear of restorative justice doing the same thing is a legitimate fear that needs to be addressed. And I think that it can be addressed primarily through which models we work with. So to my mind, having really powerful community engagement. I do a ton of work to find out who are the people who help you be your best self? Who are the people who are going to know how to lovingly hold you accountable when I'm working with someone who causes harm, to get those folks into the room, to get those folks into the process, right? working with survivors. Who are the aunties who co-sign this? Let's not include them. Who are the people who believe you and want to be there with you, right? Let's bring them into the process, right? And so these sorts of things can allay that fear. I think that there's also just a conflation with mediation. It's like, what is restorative justice? Are we driving people to some place in the center? And it's really important to keep things focused on obligations. Accountability doesn't have to be punishment. Accountability can be actually helping someone become their best self, never do this again. And sometimes it involves things like paying for therapy or agreeing to never be in these spaces when this person's going to be there. There are all these creative things that come out of plans to repair harm. But it is a radical shift to think about what would it look like to engage someone and their community that wants to help them be their best self in the notion of like safety planning, for example, right? Because we can keep moving a survivor here and there and everywhere, right? But really, the root cause of the lack of safety is the person who's causing the harm. And so, to my mind, working with that person to help them be accountable is really one of the most important things that we can do. So, I think that there's some questions about how will we do this in South Asian communities? And honestly, one of the things I hear the most is like, no one will do this. What will people say? And, I want to just gently encourage folks to realize that that's a concern in everybody's community. Like, it's not actually really special to South Asians that we don't want anyone to know about the sexual abuse happening in our communities. I don't really know any community where people want to talk about CSA. I don't, there's, was I pushed out, pushed away by being such an out survivor? Absolutely. It was an incredibly painful process to be an out and public survivor. It was an incredibly difficult thing to say, let's talk about this in big spaces and small spaces. But that's true of everybody. Like, that's true of every survivor I meet, whether they're white or any kind of BIPOC folks. Like, we all have these experiences. And so, at the same time, I do think we need South Asian specific spaces. There was a level of healing that came from my sitting with other survivors of South Asian descent that was, next level. And so just having those spaces has been incredibly powerful. I'll also say that, the abuse began when I was very young. I don't remember exactly when it began. I didn't speak English well or at all really until, English is my second language. And speaking with a person who speaks my mother tongue recently, they were talking about a different form of abuse that they experienced by their father, and they were at his deathbed, and he apologized. And he actually said in Konkani, my language, our shared language, and we called Amchigale, he said, "Tu sana shili, you were small. I shouldn't have done that to you." And when I heard that in my own language, decades after my father passed away, "Tu sana shili," like that was life-changing. And so I really want to just say that in and of itself, us learning to talk amongst ourselves in ways that maybe will resonate in some way we didn't know we needed, in the language that I learned what everything means, to hear it in that language was really powerful. So, so, I'll close really briefly with my dream. My dream is we talk to one another. We talk to one another across difference. We have what seem like impossible conversations. I think that when I think about my Annu, my father, I don't think that it is, today I can see that it might not have been such an impossible conversation, that there were ways and spaces where we could have created the structural containers needed for him to have been able to take responsibility for what he did. And, my dream for the future is one in which we have more and more and more of that within our own communities. I don't believe that restorative justice is definitely not a current panacea because we haven't created the structures necessary for it to be the way we do everything, right? But I do believe there's sort of two ways to go about things, and I've gone about them in two different ways. One is like smashing the state, which, or like being the lawyer who sues people, or, and I'm so grateful for the work of folks who are taking down things that are damaging and dangerous and need to not happen. So grateful. And I think my jam is more about like, there's like McDonald's and it's unhealthy, and I'm gonna like try to create like a community garden next door with some really yummy people, and there's gonna be good music and good food. And when you have to walk past us to get to the McDonald's, and you're gonna want to come in here. The smells better, this tastes better, this is yummier. Come on in and let's build this together. And so that really is what I want to do. It's like hopefully, the flow of traffic will just kind of stop to the McDonald's over time. And I'm grateful for the people who are over there like picketing and protesting and making the noise and doing all the things. So so that feels really important. And I also know that I think restorative justice moves like water. There are times in which right now, I think it's, it kind of blew up and then it got co-opted, and it seems like it's something that's happening in lockstep with systems and structures in ways that don't feel good for me. But the processes, I think, are really tried and true and beautiful and powerful things that we want to see flourish in the world. And so to my mind, I might be making cave paintings. When I say restorative justice moves like water, sometimes it's a stream, it's a river, it's a bay. It becomes mist maybe at times. Sometimes we won't be able to see it, but it's there. And what does it mean for it to move like water? So, and so to me, some of the work that we're doing I might not see the seed in this lifetime flourish into the flower, right? But for me, that's why maybe my work as a restorative justice auntie these days is to leave some cave paintings and see what it inspires and what iterations it takes in the future. So I think with that, I have not been paying attention to the chat at all, y'all. I am really like, I have like learning disability and all the things, sparkly brain, and I cannot do two things at once. So I genuinely apologize for not seeing it, but I hope I'll get to see it later. I hope it gets saved and get to take a look. But I think we've come up against the end of our time together, if I'm correct. So thank you all very much. Thanks for your attention and your care. And I can tell from the amount of stuff happening in the chat at a minimum that there was a lot of engagement. So I deeply appreciate all of you.
Thank you so much, Sujatha. I can promise you that the chat has been popping off and we will send it to you. But your incredibly powerful words, I think, have left such a profound impact on all of us. And thank you to everyone in this space for reflecting and sharing so vulnerably. I know we're coming up on time, but I just wanted to share that as someone who's worked in the movement, as an advocate myself, as someone who has caused and experienced harm like everyone in this room, I know we've all seen up close the limits and harms of our current systems, and it really is such a privilege to be able to take some time to dream about what new systems of care can look like and hopefully be able to build them too. So let's give another virtual round of applause for Sujatha. Thank you so, so much. We're going to launch a super quick Zoom poll. If y'all don't mind just taking it really quickly, we'd super appreciate it. We'll put all the resources and notes from today's session in the chat. If someone can go ahead and launch the poll, that would be lovely. I can go ahead and do that. Okay, I'm just relaunching the poll. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back at 45 after for our first session block. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll stay on for just a minute or so while y'all are taking the poll, and so that Sujatha can see all of the love pouring in the chat. But feel free to hop off, take a break, and we'll see you so soon. Thank you so much.